Well, let's now talk to Colonel Simon Diggins. Simon, do you know, it seems to me that this new raft of measures being proposed to come up with a definition for extremism and set up a few more bodies to tackle extremism, well, it rather seems to me like a load of bump that we heard from Tony Blair and successive prime ministers ever since. But nothing seems to be concrete. It's very easy, I think, to see who's doing the wrongdoing, who they're influenced by, and even forensically where they're getting money from. But the point of the matter is people have then got to act on it, surely.
No, I agree. The first prime ministerial statement on Islamist extremism came from Tony Blair in 2005, and there have been successive conversations, statements, public announcements by governments of all stripes, all colours, and we still are now in the situation we are now, where there is elements within the Muslim community who are basically, there's an element of extremism there, and that needs to be cut out. We need to find some way of dealing with that. It does not help that we've got some mixer over terminology. I mean, so any criticism of Islam is automatically deemed to be Islamophobia. That is simply not right. I mean, it is perfectly reasonable for Islam as a religion to be treated like every other religion in this country. But you cannot have a situation whereby a particular religion is, in fact, off bounds and out of criticism, because then you allow space, which we've now got, space for the extremists who distort the picture of Islam to come to the fore, and that's a real danger.
Simon, I remember the report, and it was back in November, so what are we now, 3 months on from that?
Yeah.
You know, far be it from me to predict the outcome of these investigations, but if you listen to the texts of what these preachers were saying, it seems to me these are open and shut cases of anti-Semitic hate speech. The calling for the death of Jews, the annihilation of the Israeli state. So it doesn't seem to me to be that difficult in terms of whether or not crimes are being committed here. So why do you think it's taken so long to get to a point where the Charities Commission are saying, oh, we're assessing it? 3 months on, we're assessing what they said. And meanwhile, only one police force has referred their investigation to the Crown Prosecution Service when there were, I think, there were several police forces involved. Why does it take so long? In my view, potentially, do you think that this shows a lack of resolve on the part of our authorities?
Sorry, just lost the line.
Oh, great.
Simon, we really do want to listen
we've lost connection.
But, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because one thing I do want to ask Simon is the fact that we are going to be going live to Parliament a bit later to watch George Galloway being sworn in by his old mucker, Jeremy Corbyn, fellow Hamas sympathiser, but also by the leader of the House, who frankly has to turn up and do it because someone's got to. You've got to have two. You've got to have two people sort of give you away, walk you down the aisle, if you will. Yeah, no right-minded MP actually wants to do it. But it's interesting because, you know, part of what's gone on recently, and we've seen this in the election of George Galloway in Rochdale, is this mobilisation of a Muslim vote, a sectarianism being introduced in politics. And one thing that struck me as quite harrowing, listening to some of his welcome speeches, his sort of, you know, celebratory speeches, is he says he's got deputies now across basically that flank of Greater Manchester, across Yorkshire, across Lancashire, people who want to represent his vile anti-Semitic extremist party. Well, actually, we've got Simon Diggins back, so let's ask him that question. Simon, hopefully we've got a clear line now.
What about my question? Why has it taken so long, Simon? Why has it taken so long for the authorities to get round to, A, only one police force has handed their file to the CPS. None of the others have. This is dating back 3 months to November, and the Charity Commission has just said, we're assessing what these people said. As I said earlier, if you actually listen to what they said, looks like a pretty open and shut case of anti-Semitic hate speech to me. Why do we drag our heels so much? Does that reveal, does that expose a lack of resolve on the part of our authorities?
I think because there's an institutional issue here. The institutional issue was highlighted really well by William Shawcross, who helped set up the PREVENT system within our country, who, when his report last year, which has just literally been updated within the last month, said that the definition of Islamophobia had been narrowed right down. So it was really quite hard to actually say to be effectively to do that, whereas the definition of so-called extreme right ideology was very, very broad. So actually, it's very difficult to persuade anybody, if you like, institutionally, if they're taking guidance from the government itself as to what is actually acceptable speech on anything to do with Islamists versus the very broad guidance to do with anything to do with the extreme right. So you have a sort of institutional bias within the system, which says actually that Islamists can say a great deal, and often really vile and unpleasant stuff, and effectively get away with it. Whereas if somebody who they deem to be extreme right, it's quite a broad definition. So I think there's an institutional issue around that. I totally agree with you, though. What you've exposed in talkTV is some simply outrageous statements, which, regardless of the fact that the war that's ongoing at the moment, should be completely unacceptable as it is, and suggests a significant failure within the institutions and particularly our government institutions and the way in which they approach Islamism.
One thing I wanted to ask you, Simon, is the fact that Rishi Sunak said extremism is now in our democracy, in alluding to, one imagines, the election of George Galloway. But George Galloway, in his sort of early acceptance speeches, was bragging essentially about having deputies for his Workers' Party across that flank of Greater Manchester, Yorkshire and Lancashire. And we also know there's an organisation called the Muslim Vote who want to sort of curate these sort of ideological voting blocks attached to one particular religion. How worried should we be about sectarianism entering our politics?
No, extremely worried. I mean, we've got examples in our own country, the United Kingdom. What happens when politics gets taken over by sectarianism in Northern Ireland? So we have a very clear example of where that happened. And indeed, there are other examples in the past when the sectarianism was Catholicism versus Protestantism. So we understand what happens. It always ends badly because people believe, rightly or wrongly, when you have a sectarian, if you like, imperative behind whatever you're saying, that they have got, if you like, God on their side, and therefore their behaviour and their extremism is often much worse than even the sort of the to and fro of what you might call secular politics. So sectarianism is a real danger to us. It leads people astray. They believe their God-given right to say what they like. They believe they've got God on their side, and they'll do and actually do terrible things. Again, as Shawcross pointed out, regardless of what people say about the sort of threat from the extreme right, in terms of actual terrorist attacks in this country, essentially, they're Islamist groups who've done this. And until we actually recognise the kind of reality of that, we're never actually going to get a grip of it.
Couldn't have put it better myself. Thank you so much, Simon. Great to talk to you.